think the audience members, Marvin Chappell and David Sung, kindly unmute yourself. We don't want any noise interference. Ripudaman, please start recording.
Has been started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I am the President of Council for Strategic Affairs. Welcome, everyone, to our monthly roundtable discussion. We are very fortunate to have a very good panel of experts. Those of you registered using our Eventbrite link saw the topic of today's roundtable discussion, Geopolitics of the Arctic Circle. Today is Saturday, August 12th, 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime in US and 7:30 p.m. in India. Just to orient yourself, this is the map of the Arctic Circle. Again, another map of the Arctic Circle with the littoral states. Our panelists today are Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, Dr. Shri Parna Pathak. She is from O.P. Jindal Global University, an associate professor there, and Kangavali Surya Narayanan, Esquire, a practicing attorney and a specialist in polar law. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. The Council imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. CSA unequivocally condemns terrorism in all its forms anywhere in the world. We are not selective. CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. Our activities include monthly roundtable discussion that is held usually on second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. We have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on fourth Saturday of each month. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publication of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. We have a summer internship program for college students, and we have started a research fellowship training program in strategic studies. I'll introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Shri Parna Pathak, who is an associate professor and the founding director of Center for Northeast Asian Studies in the Jindal School of International Affairs of O.P. Jindal Global University in Haryana state in India. She is also the Associate Dean for Admissions at the same institution. She teaches courses on foreign policies of China as well as theories of international relations. She recently published a book titled Drift and Dynamics. And she does speak Mandarin, so she is able to review and monitor original Chinese language publications and the social media, Weibo, etc. You will be seeing her soon. Our second panelist is Kannavali Surya Narayanan. Kannavali Surya Narayanan is a law graduate and gold medalist from Pondicherry University. She practices as an advocate in Chennai, India, and specializes in intellectual property rights. She is the first Indian ever to pursue her master's in polar law at University of Akureyri in Iceland. She has written extensively on Arctic geopolitics and has been invited to several conferences on the topic of Arctic. And you will be seeing Kangavali soon. Our last panelist is Ambassador Anil Vadva, who does not need any introduction. He's retired from Indian Foreign Services in 2017. He served as Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs with charge of Australasia and the Pacific, Southeast Asia, Koreas, etc. He has served as Ambassador of India to several countries, including Beijing in China. He has been posted at Permanent Mission of India to United Nations in Geneva, etc. He has a distinguished career of 38 years. He specializes in disarmament and economic relationships. He has represented India in major international fora. I'm not going to list them for sake of brevity. Currently, he is affiliated with Vivekananda International Foundation. This is Ambassador Vadva. Our format for the roundtable discussion is that I introduce the topic. Each panelist is given 5 minutes for an opening statement. This is followed by a moderated discussion for 30 to 35 minutes. And lastly, there is a question and answer session. If I may say that the opening statements will be provided to all of you later on our website in written form. We already have all those three. A little bit about the topic. Geopolitical activity in the frozen Arctic has historically been pretty low. However, with onset of global warming, this is changing. Over the time, Arctic melting is expected to reveal underwater resources and new shipping opportunities, which is leading to fear of interstate hostility in a scramble for new territories. Russia planted a flag on North Pole seabed in 2007. In reality, most of the Arctic states have bartered for unsettled territories in a peaceful manner after the Arctic states signed the 2008 ULISAT declaration committing themselves to peaceful cooperation. However, following the Ukraine crisis in 2014, there has been some spillover of hostilities. In 2019, most of the Arctic states engaged in developing governance of the region with bilateral agreements for search and rescue. However, again, since 2022, Russian special military operations in Ukraine, there have been hostilities, and Arctic 7 have kind of isolated Russia. Although Russia was the chairman of the Arctic Council for a year. So we have to evaluate everything in the context of ongoing geopolitical conflicts in the Europe. This shows you the Northwest Passage that goes through Canada. Again, the Northwest Passage. This map shows you the Northwest Passage versus the Northern Sea route, which probably will be much more controlled by Russia. Again, the same, basically, it tells you the level of ice and all that sort of thing. And this shows to you the China's polar extension of Silk Road, so-called Polar Silk Road. So there are new players, non-Arctic players coming into the geopolitics of Arctic. Before I give the floor to my distinguished panelists, there are housekeeping rules. I want everyone to keep themselves mute to avoid noise interference. If you keep on unmuting yourself, we'll have to kick you out. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our distinguished panelists. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. No anonymous questioners will be allowed to ask questions. All the questions are moderated through chat function. Questions have to be precise and specific. We don't entertain lengthy comments. This session is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel later on, as well as on our website. It is simultaneously being streamed on the YouTube. So without further ado, I'm going to start inviting our distinguished panelists for their opening statements. And it is my pleasure to invite Kanagavalli Suryanarayanan for her opening statement. Kanagavalli, please unmute yourself, please.
It's indeed my pleasure to join you all today. And I would take this 5 minutes to explain briefly about the Arctic and the Arctic Cooperation and the current status of the Arctic Cooperation. So Arctic, which was once considered as an inhospitable and remote region, and later it turned into an area of military theater during the Cold War times, majorly because of its shortest parabolic route for any sort of hyperbolic missile to go across, or due to the presence of submarines which couldn't be detected by the large sea ice. And late at the end of the Cold War, it slowly moved towards cooperation, and also the climate change has added on to it by making it an important region now. What was now considered very inhospitable, today it is considered as a region which has abundant resources, and you can go in, continue shipping or go for fishing activities there. So that's the current status. So in order to avoid the superpower conflict, so there was a regional cooperation mechanism which was set up. So the Arctic, 8 Arctic states, majorly the US, Canada, Russia, Denmark, and Norway, Sweden, and Finland, joined together and created an Arctic Council. So through the Ottawa Declaration in 1996. So this Arctic Council is an intergovernmental fora. It's not a treaty body. It's an intergovernmental fora, which there are, as I said, there are 8 member states, and also the permanent participants who are the indigenous people of the Arctic, and also the observers. In observers, we do have India, China, Korea, South Korea, Japan are all observer states. This is a kind of cooperation where the science feeds into the policy, and there is an engagement at that highest level where the ministers come in once in 2 years, and they discuss on the Arctic issues. And also the senior Arctic officials engage on a regular time, and they take it ahead. The Arctic cooperation was started in 1989 with the speech of Mikhail Gorbachev, who wanted the Arctic to become a zone of peace, because he thought that the Arctic is slowly the command economy, and then get into cooperation with the West. So this was one of such attempts for him to expand his cooperation. And the Arctic Council does not deal with the military security. However, it does engage with the human security aspect, and also on the environmental protection and sustainable development. So the Arctic Council, as I said, is a soft law creation. So it's not a treaty body, but that doesn't diminish its ability. It has been able to facilitate 3 major treaties governing the Arctic. And also, it has been able to influence policy making, the global policy making in environmental law and protection. So the role of Arctic Council has been commendable in the Arctic governance. And there's a normative concept called the Arctic exceptionalism, which the Arctic states used to believe that it's an unwritten rule or belief, where the Arctic cooperation would continue to happen despite whatever happens in the rest of the world. Even during Crimea, post-Crimea in 2014, the cooperation was continuing. And but only after the Ukraine war in 2022, there is a pause in the Arctic cooperation, which means the Arctic 7 states, that's all the NATO states, are on one side and Russia on the other side. As you rightly said, Russia was holding the chairmanship for 2 years, but no activities happened. And right now, the chairmanship has moved from Russia to Norway. So this is where currently it is. And Russia is slowly moving away from the A7 and towards cooperation with China and other BRIC states, because it's looking to build a scientific cooperation in Svalbard and Barentsburg setup, where something similar to New Alescent, where there is a scientific base where all the parties to the Svalbard Treaty cooperate there. So in a similar fashion, it is also trying to come up with a scientific base in Barentsburg. And of course, US and Canada are very much worried about the no limit partnership between US and Russia. But having all of this, that doesn't mean there is no governance, there is no mechanism that is prevailing there. The law of sea very much applies to the Arctic like any other region. And we do have bilateral and multilateral cooperation. We do have the Central Arctic Ocean Agreement, which deal with the fisheries aspect in the Arctic Ocean. And even the Conference of Parties recently happened in Korea. Thank you so much. I hope I was able to give you a brief of what is happening there.
Thank you very much indeed, Kanagavalli. You stuck to the timeline. Actually, you took 1 minute less for your opening statement, and I'm thankful to you for that. Now it's my honor and distinct pleasure to invite Dr. Shri Parna Pathak, who is Associate Professor at OP Jindal University. Shri Parna, the floor is yours. Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adyatanji, and it's indeed an honor to be here. It's a very pertinent issue which affects most of us. We generally think about conflicts more in military terms, but this is, the melting of polar glaciers is something which will affect all of us, irrespective of nationalities or ethnicities. So, what I'm going to do today is talk about the new player, which you mentioned, in your introductory speech, which is China, which is vying for a space in the Arctic region. Now, for any country in the international system, one of the most important indices of its power is the territory which it holds. And we've had wars over territories. We currently also are seeing a very difficult situation in Russia and Ukraine, and it's still about territory. This whole concept of territory since 1648 onwards has existed through various epochs of history. So, territory in the simplest of terms would be an area of land or sea or airspace, which is under the jurisdiction of a state. But as international relations have evolved, concepts such as exclusive economic zones, sea lanes of communication, amongst others, have also entered the lexicon of international politics. All of this hinge on the concept of territory. Now, China in the current epoch of history has caused a lot of churnings in the understanding of the concept of territory because it seeks to have a greater role in governance of territories which are not technically within its geographical bounds. And one perfect example of this would be the Arctic region. In 2018, China released its official Arctic policy paper, in which it declares itself as a near Arctic state and an active participant, builder, and contributor in Arctic affairs, one that has spared no efforts to contribute its wisdom to the development of the Arctic region. Why is China really doing this? Why does it want to be a participant in the Arctic region? What does this participation really mean? Now, China claims to be a responsible player in international relations. So, but obviously, it should not be making an irresponsible or rather an irrational claim, such as being a near Arctic state, because geographically it is not near the Arctic. So, the usage of terms is very important. Given the vast resources of oil, minerals, trade routes, and even fish in the Arctic, there has been more desire to exploit the region. Given China's reliance on oil supplies, the necessity of the Chinese economy to have sustained trade ties, sustained trade routes, China's postures toward the Arctic become a little clearer. But the fact also remains is that the Arctic is warming faster than everywhere else on the planet, as was pointed out by the previous panelists in brilliant ways. So the emergence of players and entities, which are technically not geographical entities, actually poses further questions of devastation for the very fragile climate in the region. It could emerge into something of the sort of a new Cold War. And, I'm not playing on the term Cold War because the region is cold, but the fact is that Russia, China, and the US are all vying for influence and control in a part of the world which is not the most resilient one. With more than half of all Arctic coastline along its northern shores, Russia has sought to, further economic and military control in this part of the world. But now there's China, which is pushing its way into the Arctic, announcing, in 2018, its ambitions to develop a new polar Silk Road. Now, China has described the Arctic as one of the world's new strategic frontiers. The moment the term strategic enters the lexicon, it means that the purpose moved beyond just climate change or addressing climate change. It's now strategic. They've also said it's ripe for rivalry and extraction. So China sees the Arctic, along with the Antarctic, the seabed, the space, as ungoverned or undergoverned spaces. While some of the more external discourses from China emphasize the need to constrain competition in these domains, there are several other internal discourses which take a more cynical view and emphasize the need to prepare for competition within these arenas and over the resources. One example is when the head of the Polar Research Institute for China called these sorts of public spaces in the Arctic and the Antarctic the most competitive resource treasures. China's national security law creates the legal capacity to protect China's rights across these regions, and top Chinese Communist Party officials have often suggested China's share of these resources should be equal to its share of the global population. That's a very risky proposition. So now China claims to be an important player in tackling climate change. In order to ensure that the further degradation of the Arctic does not take place, it becomes important to closely observe and analyze Chinese actions so that a more coherent approach to tackling the fallouts can be undertaken by like-minded states of the international system. So I'll just stop here and probably we'll have a greater discussion. Thank you once again, Dr. Adityanji.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Pathak. It was a pleasure to hear you, and with your expertise in China and Mandarin, we are hearing a direct view here, so I'm thankful to you. Now it's my distinct honor and pleasure to invite Ambassador Anil Wadhwa to deliver his opening statement. Sir, kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dechiji. I think those were two very prominent opening statements by my fellow panelists. So it's a little difficult to talk too much more about the topic that you've given me, which is essentially geopolitical issues and international relations in the Arctic. But let me begin by saying that I agree with the fact that during the Cold War, the Arctic had a very prominent place in the political and military standoff between the two superpowers. And then we had the 1990s, as the previous speakers have pointed out, we saw various regional and cooperative initiatives in the Arctic. Once the Arctic Council was formed in 1996, essentially it was to coordinate a common strategy for states and communities and the natural resources that were affected by the changes in the Arctic Circle. It was clear that the security dynamics that we talk about today in the Arctic have remained anchored from that time onwards at the sub-regional level. So we talk about the Barents Sea, the Bering Sea, and the Straits area, and even the Baltic Sea region. But of all the different parts, I think the European Arctic is undoubtedly the most active and the most challenging. We had a reference to the Russian action of the Russian flag planting in the North Pole seabed in 2007 when they tried to claim the Lomonosov Ridge. And then there was some talk at that time of the Great Game in the North, which many said had begun and that it was a scramble for the Arctic. But in reality, we saw that the Arctic states opted to settle claims in a very peaceful manner when they signed the 2008 Ilulissat Declaration, and they committed themselves to peaceful cooperation. And then we even had the Ukraine crisis in 2014. At that time, also there was only a marginal spillover in this region. So for long, anyone who's analyzing the situation in the Arctic has debunked this notion of resource wars in the Arctic because of the sheer size of this area and the difficulties of access in a very difficult terrain. And the fact that the Arctic states already had ownership over most of these areas through the law of the sea regime. But over the past decade, as the previous speakers have pointed out, the Arctic has started melting, and as a consequence of climate change, and that has enhanced the strategic rivalry amongst the great powers. So mainly Russia, United States, and China in particular, since it is expected to reveal underwater marine resources like petroleum and minerals, and then open up new shipping opportunities as well. So this has not been helped by the fact that after the Russian special military operation in Ukraine in February 2022, the cooperation by the 7 Arctic states has been suspended with Russia under the auspices of the Arctic Council, and this process is on since March 2022. Following this, in February 23, Russia also amended its Arctic policy up to 2035, which was released earlier in March 2020. So Russia's preoccupation today is with ways to avoid Western sanctions, and the Arctic arrangements are bound to see a fallout, whether we like it or not. Now, coming to China, which Dr. Pathak talked a lot about China. China is one of the 13 observer states in the Arctic Council, but has been pushing itself as a near Arctic state. Now, observer states can only put forward proposals through the Arctic Council member states, and China has been strengthening its Arctic collaboration mainly with Russia. And that ranges from energy to science and defense, as climate change opens up the prospect of a very viable northern sea route and turns the polar region into another front then for the US-China rivalry. And China wants to become a polar power by 2030. The Russians are also currently testing a new route through a cargo of crude oil with China, crossing the Atlantic Ocean and arriving at the Chinese province of Shandong. I think it's supposed to be happening today or tomorrow, reducing the transport time by 30% and also cutting the freight costs, quite substantially. So China has actually entered quite consciously into numerous science and environmental cooperation projects, and it has undertaken a number of expeditions which are open to observers in the Atlantic Council. Some of these have raised suspicion of espionage and activities related to military intelligence, like the research station built in Kiruna in Sweden in 2019. And if you recall, in 2018, Finland had thwarted a Chinese attempt to buy an airport in Lapland through the state-owned Polar Research Institute, which is based in Shanghai. This year, there's been a proposal by the same institute for deploying underwater devices on a very large scale in the Arctic Ocean for communication and navigation positioning, which has come under scrutiny and opposition, given the possibility of the Chinese using nuclear submarines clandestinely under the polar ice. But we have the growing isolation of Russia. There are Western sanctions. There's denial of technology, especially in hydrocarbon exploration and extraction. So that is increasingly driving China and Russia together, like elsewhere. And this has increased the dependence of Russia on China for its export revenues, its technology deficits and supply chains. So obviously, this is enhancing China's leverage, and it's forcing Russia into an uncomfortable acquiescing partnership, which may result in enhanced Chinese military presence in the Arctic. A third effect of this is these developments have forced the United States to see the Arctic as another area where the competition between the US and China is increasing. So the Trump administration, if one recalls, had gone so far as to state publicly that China wants to create another situation like the South China Sea in the Arctic. Now, although the rhetoric might suggest otherwise, for the United States, the Arctic has served primarily as a location for missile and defense capabilities, for surveillance infrastructure, and a limited number of strategic forces. It's also important for the US Navy and the Coast Guard, although I would say that the US has yet to invest very significantly in Arctic capabilities and infrastructure. And remember, the Arctic Ocean presents the shortest missile flight trajectory, as well as submarine passage between China and Europe and North America. So if the Sino-Russian cooperation in the Arctic increases at the pace that we are currently seeing, the United States will have to invest substantial resources to maintain a security balance in the region. Finally, I would like to say something about Indian interest in the Arctic as well. because it's important in the context of the crucial area it is for Indian scientists because it influences our monsoons, which directly impact our agriculture sector. And the rising sea levels due to the melting of the Arctic also threaten our 1,300 plus island territories. The Arctic melting helps in understanding the glacial melting of the Himalayas, which is home to India and the region's perennial rivers. These sustain a majority of the population of India. And India has therefore had a permanent research station in the Arctic since 2008. It has also undertaken about 13 scientific expeditions to the Arctic. This region can help in meeting India's energy security, shortages in critical minerals, etc. And so India has come up with the India Arctic policy, which is called Building a Partnership for Sustainable Development. This was released on 17th of March 2022. And we've been an observer in the Arctic Council since 2013. What India has been trying to do is to push for greater say for observer states to avoid great power rivalry to the detriment of the common good, and also contribute to the best of our ability in checking the Chinese aggressive activities in the region. So there, India must work with Asian and other observers in this endeavor. So I think I'll end there. I think my 5 minutes are up already. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Wadhwa, for your comments. Very comprehensive, all encompassing. You have touched every issue I wanted to be discussed in the geopolitical discussion and international relations. So thank you very much indeed. Now we will have a period of moderated discussion in which I will be asking very specific questions to each of our distinguished panelists. So my first question goes to Dr. Shri Parna Pathak. Dr. Pathak, Chinese footprint is increasing in the Arctic region. China currently has two icebreakers, Shulong 1 and Shulong 2. China's third icebreaker / polar research vehicle is becoming operationalized in 2025. These are all conventionally powered. Since 2019, China has been talking about an experimental ship for polar research, which is likely to be a 33,000 tons advanced polar research vehicle, likely to be powered by nuclear power. That capability will make China the second nation in the Arctic region having nuclear-powered polar research vehicles. From your understanding of the Chinese, media, Chinese documents, when is this nuclear-powered polar research vehicle of China going to become operationalized? Kindly unmute yourself. You are muted.
Thank you for the wonderful question. As you said, Zhongshan Tashhuiqi is China's third polar icebreaker after the Shuilong and Shuilong 2. It set out on January 17th to the South China Sea, then voyaged through extremely fierce winter winds, etc., and moved across the East China Sea. So China clearly has been taking a lot of interest in building such vehicles. But as you said, it understands the usage of a nuclear-powered vehicle. So as per Chinese media news reports, it is still under construction. But we also know that China has it has an expertise in coming up with things very quickly. So my understanding would be that while making exact predictions is difficult, but judging from whatever the chatter is, it should be there around the next 3 to 4 years or even lesser. Why I say this is that all of these Shuilong 1, Shuilong 2, Zhongshan Tashhuiqi, all of these were built from ships of or parts from the 1980s, and it was built as an ice breaking anchor. So if they can reutilize things from you know parts which are that old in history. That's quite a unique feat. So, in short, just to answer you, it should not, it should be less than 5 years as per whatever the chatter is, as per whatever the Chinese expertise is in building. So, in simple, short terms, just I think the time that we will see it there is going to be very soon. I hope this answers, and I didn't take too much of time.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. My next question is for Kanagavalli. Kanagavalli, you did talk about the doctrine of Arctic exceptionalism. But if we look critically, the actions of Arctic 7 defeat the doctrine of Arctic exceptionalism, resulted in a stalemate of functioning of the Arctic Council for 2 years. Now, this year, with Norway taking over the presidency of Arctic Council, do you envisage any change in the attitudes of Arctic 7, or it will be business as usual? The same kind of isolation of Russia will continue, which in my mind is somewhat short-sighted because it's driving Russia into greater and enhanced partnership with China in the Arctic region also. Kanagavalli?
Thank you for this wonderful question. Definitely, to give a very straightforward answer, I don't see any immediate change in the Arctic 7 behavior because they are looking to cooperate among themselves. And the Arctic 7 is trying to engage, even under the Arctic Council Working Group, whatever projects that the Arctic 7 are doing, only those scientific projects are taken forward ahead. And Russia is, there is no cooperation, there is no political cooperation with Russia, or there is no sort of scientific cooperation that can be immediately seen with Russia. Unfortunately, it pushes Russia towards China, and the China-Russia cooperation is what is seen in the Arctic. And I don't see an immediate change of position in the with the NATO players. And whatever neutrality was there with Finland and Sweden being non-NATO members, I think now that is also going away. I don't see the Arctic exceptionalism as a concept anytime coming back to the region. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Kanagavalli. So we have to write an obituary of the doctrine of Arctic exceptionalism. It has become part of the usual geopolitics. But thanks for your, sharing your opinion. My next question goes to Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Ambassador Wadhwa, you talked about India's, policy doctrine on Arctic that was released in 2022. India and China became observer states in the Arctic Council at the same time. Yet, the then Prime Minister of China, Wen Jiabao, in 2012, made a 2-day state visit to Iceland, the smallest of the Arctic Council members. You have been a member of the Diplomatic Corps of India. When is an Indian Prime Minister ever going to visit Ireland to enhance bilateral cooperation?
So that's a very good question, and I think I think the Chinese have devised a system for a long period of time now, where they divide these visits amongst their prominent leaders. It's not just confined to a few ministers or the prime minister or the of the top leadership. Let's put it that way. But they also have a series of vice ministerial level visits and follow-ups, which has stood them in very good stead. The other aspect of Chinese foreign policy, as far as bilateral visits is concerned, is that they pay special attention to the smaller states and not ignore states from where they feel there's not much to be gained, because every state is important at some stage or the other. And I think it's in keeping with that spirit that the Chinese recognize the importance at that point in time, as you said, in 2012, of this region. Obviously, the planning has gone into the Chinese thinking in terms of what they can do in future with the Arctic states. And even as an observer state in 2013 onwards, if you see the activities of the Chinese, there is much more to be seen there than what you can see from the other observer states. And I would include Japan and Korea, Singapore, the other Asian states in that category. Uh, I don't think India has done too badly given our resources. But at the same time, I think the Chinese have different aims from what is becoming clear right now in terms of passage routes which are now opened up, and also the fact that there is natural resources which can be exploited in the region. So the spirit of cooperation comes second, I presume, and as far as the other states are concerned, they look at it more from the perspective of the cooperative aspect and later on exploitation. And I suppose that is a difference in approach. What is right or wrong here, one cannot judge. But I think it's a long-term policy, which the Chinese have done very well in that respect.
So you would not answer my question, when is an Indian Prime Minister going to visit? I explain.
I cannot answer that question because it all depends on the circumstances and when that opportunity arises, I suppose. But I do hope that it's very, very soon.
Just for sake of our audience, Icelandic Prime Minister has visited India in, I think, 2018, and Indian Prime Minister has met Icelandic Prime Minister 2 or 3 times in the Nordic India Summit. So they have been contacts, but I think it would be a gesture, an important diplomatic gesture to a small state. And you build cooperation. So as a member of diplomatic corps or retired diplomat, I would encourage you to talk to the power that be, that let's not neglect the smaller members of the Arctic Council. So that would be my request to you. My next question actually goes to Dr. Shri Parna Pathak. Dr. Pathak, Chinese economy has become a little stagnant. The unemployment rate is high. The youth are getting a little bit discouraged. Manufacturing sector has been lagging. Exports are declining. China had allocated actually $3 billion to the northern route, developing northern route, developing infrastructure and all. That's quite a big investment. Now with these toughening of the fiscal resources, do you envisage that China's level of interest and financial allocation to Arctic region and developing the alternate shipping routes will continue to be the same, or there will be some decline to adjust to the domestic situation that is tough at this point in time?
Thank you so much, Dr. Aditya. It's a very interesting question. And as you said, there are various indices of the Chinese economy which are all declining. Unemployment is just one. Consumer confidence has just not picked up. So the Chinese NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission, recently has come out with a set of rules or principles as to what could be done. Xi Jinping has also talked about it. The point being, and a lot of different, organizations within the Chinese governance system, they have talked about it. So the question clearly is, why is the need for these different leaders and different governance structures to talk about it? Of course, things are not really well. But does that mean that China will pull back from its external commitments? You had mentioned about China's Polar Silk Road, and as part of the BRI, or the Belt and Road Initiative, um, it's an important one. Now, the BRI, it was launched not because it will just enhance China's stature. The Chinese said that it is an economic initiative. It is fair enough. Let's just assume that what is being said is true. Even if it's just an economic initiative, it is intended to help the Chinese economy. In the absence of external markets, because of myriads of reasons, starting from the global financial crisis to the US-China economic war to the pandemic to the US and Western countries wanting to develop alternative supply routes, Chinese economy's exports need to find alternative destinations, which is why the BRI came in place. Of course, it has strategic initiatives. Now, the BRI is so important that Xi Jinping has actually written it into the constitution. If there is any pull out of any BRI engagements, it's going to be literally a slap on the face. And the Chinese culture is such that they do not want a loss of face. There's of course a link between culture, a country's culture and its strategic culture. So a loss of face would mean a huge thing. So China at the moment, even if it temporarily focuses only on the domestic economy, it doesn't mean that it's going to pull back from any aspect of the BRI, including the Arctic state. Secondly, it will try more and more to extract more resources from the region because the Chinese economy needs to continuously grow. Otherwise, the stability of the Communist Party of China is under a question. So, in short, in just one line, um, we should not expect or read too much into this narrative that China is going to move back from any of its commitments, be it in the Arctic or Antarctic. If anything, it's only going to get more aggressive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. My next question goes to Kanagavalli Suryanarayanan, our specialist on polar law. So, Kanagavalli, you are aware that United States has not ratified the UNCLOS yet. The Arctic states do not want negotiation of a separate treaty to govern the Arctic waters. And the Arctic Ocean and the resources, everything is still governed by the UNCLOS. If you were a legal advisor to Joe Biden, what would be your advice to US administration? Isn't the US government policy going to prove short-sighted since UNCLOS is the governing treaty for Arctic Ocean? And US, in any international dispute in the Arctic region, actually does not enhance its influence or stature by refusing to sign the UNCLOS.
Thank you so much. Regarding the UNCLOS, UNCLOS is only part of the law of sea, and also US does not accept UNCLOS. But despite that, most of the provisions of the UNCLOS is part of the customary international law which the US recognizes. And even with regard to the planting of the Russian flag in the North Pole, which has become a big claim, and there was a lot of media report about it. So there's no legal sanctity to it because the whole of Arctic region, like any other ocean, is under the UN Convention on Law of Sea. All the Arctic states, except for the US, have submitted their claims to the Commission on CLCS Commission. So that is pending before the Commission. For example, we had it in 2023, we had the recommendation for the Russian part. We do have the recommendation pending from the overlapping claims for the Danish part and also from the on the Canadian part. So once these claims or these recommendations come out, there will be a process and agreement between these states to come to a conclusion how to take it forward. So I don't think that's a major concern that how these Arctic Ocean is going to be handled or the resources are going to be exploited. And also for the non-Arctic states, I don't see there is going to be any area or seabed which is available for them to go and explore the resources. It's only the high seas part, which the Central Arctic Ocean region, which is going to be important for the fisheries aspect. So that's where the Chinese and the other players want to get involved with. So there is going to be no major crisis according to me as far as the exploration of the undersea bed. So US wouldn't be so keen, and I expect US would also submit its scientific claim to the CLCS committee in the due course. So it would all be settled normally, is my understanding.
Thank you, Kanagavalli. My next question goes to Ambassador Wadhwa. Ambassador Wadhwa, you had talked about some, disputes, territorial dispute or sovereignty disputes in the Arctic area, especially about the Hans Islands. In a futuristic scenario, as the resources of Arctic become available with the melting of the Arctic ice? Do you envisage any hard conflict in the Arctic region, especially as countries are making claims to Commission for, limitation of the continental shelf, which Kanagavalli talked about? Uh, are there likely to be similar, territorial issues like South China Sea in the Arctic region? Do you envisage any such possibility, or it will remain a low conflict area?
So I think partly this question was answered by the previous panelists, and I think whatever claims there are at the moment, they have all been submitted for the overlapping claims which are existing right now. So we await what happens at the CLCS. After that, these states will be negotiating amongst themselves for settling the existing disputes. Now the question arises as to what happens when there are new possibilities and new resources which open up as a result of the melting of the ice. So that's another question, because as far as the continental shelf is concerned, these matters would have been settled already. So the question of a major dispute arising for exploitation would be much less. And of course, the extra continental states are excluded then obviously from entering into any kind of a claim. But one cannot rule out a situation which has happened in the South China Sea. And in the South China Sea, we've seen that even though there is a judgment which is upholding the UNCLOS, you find that the Chinese have put forth their historical claims. And if you go back to historical claims, there is nothing which can stop you from creating a dispute, which is exactly what has happened in this situation. You create a 9-dashed line which nobody else recognizes. And even if it goes against UNCLOS and there's a judgment against in favor, even then, this dispute continues. So, well, of course, if there is disruption to be done, then powerful countries can always take that route. We just hope that this doesn't happen in the Arctic region.
Thank you, Ambassador Varza. My next question goes to Dr. Shriparna Pathak. And again, I would rely on your, expertise in Mandarin and your review of the Chinese media. So far, China has made 3 failed attempts to buy strategic assets, physical assets in the Arctic states, namely in Iceland in 2011 and 2012, then in Greenland when they wanted to buy some mining towns and an airport, and then in Finland. Are you aware of any other plans by China to acquire bases, land for a resort or a recuperant center for any other assets, physical assets in the Arctic region at this point in time? Because some of these attempts were made repeatedly. If one attempt failed, they tried another route. If outright purchase or sale of land in Iceland did not go through, they tried to lease the land. So one way or the other, they are trying to have Chinese footprint in Arctic states, trying the weakest ones like Iceland and Greenland. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Pathak.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As you correctly pointed out, they have tried a lot to increase their footprint in the Arctic, and they found neighboring states where they can actually leverage their interests. And you mentioned 2 states, but just to go through a few other projects. If you just look at Greenland between 2012 to 2017. Chinese investments reached $2 billion, almost 12% of Greenland's GDP. And state-owned enterprises are working to secure mining rights, investing in projects for development of rare earth minerals. Some projects, of course, have been cancelled. But then there are projects which still remain. So under this guise of, developing infrastructure or research institutions, PRC actors have sought to purchase or develop numerous airports, including some former US military bases. I think you mentioned, Iceland, but so I'll not get into too much of Iceland, but I'll just quickly talk about Russia, because, the collaboration between China and Russia has been mentioned by other panelists as well. In just 2018 alone, China Development Bank pledged 10 billion US dollars to support the Belt and Road Initiative in Russia, which of course includes the Polar Silk Road. Chinese capital, or the PRC's capital, has financed over 80% of the Yamal LNG facility conditioned on PRC firms dominating construction and operation. The key point here being dominating construction and operation. So, China calls the shots over here. Then in Finland also, there are lots of state-owned enterprises from the PRC which have financed and are major stakeholders, who are operators of biorefinery and biofuels projects. In Norway, China has its Yellow River research base at Svalbard, which I think one of the panelists have mentioned in the past. So China is not going to back down, even despite its failures. There have been some remarks that China has failed in its Arctic ambitions in Greenland. But the fact is, I just mentioned a few of these projects in a few of the other Arctic states. So China understands the importance of this region very well, strategic and economic, as well as military. So it should not just be, assumed that China has failed, because even beyond failure, there are other plans. China will invest. In the previous question, you mentioned Chinese economy is faltering. Definitely, it is faltering. But then, whenever the economy falters, what China does is that it comes up with a bigger initiative to, exploit economic resources elsewhere, so that it can, propel its domestic economy forward. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Actually, that was a very lucid answer to my question. The point is that Chinese government will never give up in what they are trying to do. And it has implications for the international community in general, because you create a basis, an economic asset, a physical asset, followed by a strategic and militarization of the region. So there is a game plan going on, and I just wanted international community to be aware of that. My next question goes to Kanagavalli. Kanagavalli, as you know, India obtained observer status of the Arctic Council in 2013 along with China. However, India has not been commensurate in its own activities, especially in the economic realm in the Arctic region. For example, India has not taken so much of interest in Arctic Economic Council, which is an independent body from Arctic Council. India has not had much participation in Arctic Circle Forum activities. If you were, as an expert advising Government of India, and if you were contributing to a future white paper on India's Arctic policy, what would be your advice to Indian government about full-fledged, full-hearted, whole nation participation in other Arctic-related forums besides Arctic Council? Please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I had been part of India's delegation in the Arctic Circle last year in Iceland, and I've also been incidentally advising India on how the policy has to be taken forward with regard to the Arctic region. And most of India's Arctic policy is focused on the scientific cooperation. You are very right about it. And the Ministry of Earth Sciences and NCPR deal with the major part of the Arctic cooperation and activities. Unlike China, our policy is not strategically aligned, and we do not focus on the economic aspects. And we are currently having engagements. We are trying to bring in, become a member of the AEC, so which is the Arctic Economic Council. We are bringing in some FICCI and other people to be on board. That process is on. But however, India's alignment on the scientific aspect, where the other panelists had spoken about how China has been strategically investing in Iceland and Greenland. I had been in Iceland for quite some time, so I know what is happening on ground really with respect to the Chinese policy. After 2008 and the banking crisis, the Chinese involvement in Iceland has been increasing, and they have been trying to buy a harbor in the northern part of Iceland. And once that couldn't materialize, they went into setting up an Aurora observatory in the northern Iceland, which is between Akureyri and Mývatn. So, and such sort of activities Chinese have been involved with. But on the other hand, India has not even been able to come up with a polar vessel, icecraft vessel. So these are all the problems that India is facing majorly because of our own economic strength. Within that, whatever capability we could do. But we are hiring vessels from Norway to do these Arctic expeditions, both in the Arctic and the Antarctic region. So India has to develop its strategy, focus it more towards and MEA should get more involved with it with respect to how India takes things forward. It should not be under the isolated control of Ministry of Earth Sciences is my opinion on the matter.
Thank you, Kanagavalli. In fact, just for our viewers, Indian government approved actually an investment of 1,041 crores to acquire a polar research vehicle, a vessel in 2013. And the tender process went through, and in 2015, Spain was given the Spanish company was given the contract, but they put on conditionalities that were not acceptable to Indian government, and the project was shelved. And it's only actually this month that the government of India has sanctioned a budget of 2,600 crores to build an indigenously built polar research vehicle. However, the timeline is 5 years. So that speaks for India's, lagging response pretty much in the area. I just wanted to bring this information. But taking from this, my next question goes to Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. And I will actually again like to draw on your diplomatic expertise and experience and influence, where you could actually give some suggestions as an advisor to the government. Governments, universities, private companies, research institutions, organizations, think tanks, associations, other partners are openly invited to submit proposals for sessions at Arctic Circle Forum. There are 5 Asian countries, including China, United Arab Emirates, Singapore, Japan, and South Korea, that have actually sponsored Arctic Circle Forum meetings in their cities. India has not. With your diplomatic expertise, to keep India's diplomatic engagement in Arctic region, would you advise Government of India to take lead in sponsoring an Arctic Circle Forum in one of the Indian cities in near future?
Well, I think it's goes beyond without any thought. I would say yes, because that's a very sound idea, and since so many other countries who are observers have done the same, I think it's just natural that India should be doing it also. If there has to be some interest which is to be created, on our policy and also the policy towards Arctic. Um, I would suggest, though, in this case, that the universities that have been working on it or involved with the policy so far should be chosen, whichever city it is, not going by any other consideration, but the fact that some amount of work should have been done in that university already, rather than starting from scratch. And that is the key here. If there is a critical mass of thought which is available, then it should be built upon, and that will be a shorter way of doing things.
Taking upon the same thing, I will extend it a little bit. Since it's open not just to the government, but to any other association or institution, Would Vivekananda International Foundation along with MPIDSA take the lead and submit a proposal?
Well, that's a good thought, and I will certainly take it up with the Vivekananda Foundation in the coming days. Why not? Because it's something which has been done in the past on some new ideas that Vivekananda Foundation has generated, and that leads to further thinking and writing about the subject.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa, for taking up the suggestion. Looks like Kanagavalli wants to speak. Kanagavalli, please go ahead.
Yeah. Can I come in? Yeah. We have been part of the forums in the Arctic Council meeting. Last year, we were part of the third port process meeting, and we were part of other forums. Our government officials from India had come down, and we had made a presentation. And this year, I'm also making a presentation on one of the topics with professors of University of Akureyri on neocolonialism and third pole processes. That's another topic I would be presenting. So we are from India are presenting in the Arctic Circle events, and we do have a very good discussion with Olafur Ragnar and his team. So the cooperation is ongoing, is what I would like to add.
Kanagavalli, thanks for the information, but point I'm trying to make is that India as a country is not punching the weight according to its size. Third Polar Forum is basically an initiative of UAE, not of India. And that is where the country's policy planners and strategic analysts have been lagging. So the idea is to spur some participation using think tanks and non-government organizations if government does not take interest.
Yeah, I'm currently researching on that, and India has made its point clear on the third pole process. Very categorically made it what its position is on the initiative from the Arctic Circle.
So our portion on moderated discussion is concluded. However, now we have question and answers from our audience. Our audience have been sending questions through the chat function, and I will read appropriate questions from the chat function. And in this section, any of the distinguished panelists are free to respond to any of the questions. So I'll start with a question from Kyle Marston. As an emerging source of interstellar space science, how do our panelists view continuing cooperation in that domain to continue to monitor the Arctic? You can predict this. Don't we need satellites without bias to observe actions of others? Whoever wants to answer that. Monitoring the Arctic region using satellite cooperation.
Yeah, so maybe I can attempt to start answering. Maybe the others will join in later. So I think it's become very important today, as far as space technology is concerned. If you want to monitor anything remote parts of the world, it's important to rely on space technology. It's one of the more important sources now. We've seen how it has helped in terms of monitoring of ship movements, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. And there is a cooperative endeavor to do so, and also create an information network. Something similar will need to be done in the Arctic. So far, perhaps there was not a need to do so, but as the Arctic opens up after the ice melting, and if navigation starts in particular, then it's very important that this should start as well. So I think this is certainly a good idea. At the moment, we have a strange situation where, and we talked about this, where we don't have that cooperation as far as the Arctic Council is concerned. But there's one other issue that I'd like to point out, that the Arctic Council was not supposed to go into military matters or strategic matters. And now we have a situation where we'll increasingly be looking into that situation. So back in 2019, in fact, the United States has suggested that the initial mandate of the Arctic Council should be changed because there were new developments, and in future there would have to be some thought given to the strategic or the military aspects as well. So I believe the time has arrived to start thinking about it in a serious manner, and space reliability would become an important factor.
Any of the other panelists want to say, please chime in.
Yeah, I would completely agree with. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Ambassador, whatever he said on how it is going towards strategic and military aspect. And if I remember correctly, we have some sort of cooperation with US on the satellite development with something called NISAR. I'm not able to recollect it perfectly. So we are engaging with US to develop a satellite and engage in the Arctic region. That's something that India is taking ahead. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Dr. Pathak, you wanted to say something.
If I could just quickly add one line, because Kangavali has already mentioned the project. India actually has a space-based cooperation with Russia and the US, but this, of course, needs to be enhanced with other Arctic countries bilaterally, multilaterally, probably on the client-seller sort of relationship. This year, when Prime Minister Modi had gone to the US, we did sign an agreement on rare earth metals. Now, rare earth metals are things which, are extremely needed, and China sits on the 97% production of total rare earth materials. Arctic region is very, it has a lot of rare earth materials which can help in the further development of science and technology. So within these ages, probably India and US could probably explore something further. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. If I may just join in with Kangavalli. During Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, D.C., another actually agreement was signed on space cooperation, the NISAR, that acronym. So yes, there is a cooperation, and it was rejuvenated or enhanced further in the recent visit. I'll go to the next question, and it is from Bhagwat in the chat function. Since what is happening in the Arctic region will have ramifications for the entire world, should not the United Nations get involved directly, even though it is not effective in quite a few areas there, instead of leaving the matter only to the Arctic 8? Whoever wants to join. Kangavalli, you have any?
Can I take the first shot?
Sure, go ahead.
Look, I'm so sorry, Ms. Kangavali. You can please go ahead. Okay, so United Nations has often been criticized as being extremely toothless. While it was created after the Second World War, it was not envisaged that newer challenges such as those of climate change or control over the Arctic, or polar regions emerging as strategic arenas would emerge. The United Nations has this organization or sub-organization within it called the United Nations Environment Program, under which it talks about the Arctic region. But of course, there's a bigger need to bring in other arenas. Can the United Nations really take actions? This is exactly why it's called toothless, because in international relations, there's no 911 which one can dial when there's actually a crisis. So which is why United Nations can only suggest, it can bring in sanctions, it can do those sorts of things. But even with sanctions, there's a question because there's the P5, which is why at the moment, the UN, at least for me, seems a pretty toothless organization. But I'll wait for the comments of the other panelists.
Kangavalli?
Arctic is, even though considered fragile, and it's very important for the climate aspect of it, the teleconnection aspect of it. What happens in the Arctic does affect here. It's become a very cliche statement now. So it does. But however, these are sovereign territories. We need to remember these are sovereign states, and sovereign rights extend to the region beyond the territorial limits. So we have to take the Arctic 8 on board for doing anything. So any fragile region, no other body can come and dictate terms. So we need to take this into consideration. So I wouldn't expect the UN to enter the Arctic issue at all.
Okay. I don't know whether Ambassador Wadhwa has any comments on this question. Or
Yes, I had one short comment on this. I think, whenever there's an issue on which there is no clear jurisdiction, then if member states get interested in it, then they start negotiating something by way of a treaty or an arrangement. Now, in this case, we have the Arctic Council, which has been in existence for quite some time. It has worked fairly well in that regional context. And plus, all the major players here are members. We also have now an interest from major superpowers, etc. So I think if we start trying to bring in, more arrangements into this, it'll take years for it to be negotiated. What should be done is that the Arctic Council should be made responsible to report to a UN body and give it some more teeth, in the sense that if the Arctic Council feels that there is a violation which is happening by way of a grave violation by way of degradation of the environment, or if there is enhanced military activity, then it should be allowed to depose before the Security Council and let the Security Council deliberate on it. Otherwise, there is no other way that we can create another body to monitor what is happening there.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa. As my moderator's prerogative, I will give my 2 cents, and they are 2 cents only. Involving United Nations in any international dispute actually brings disaster rather than solving it. We have seen it time and again. United Nations is an outdated colonial structure. It has neither teeth nor wherewithal. Any issue that is taken to United Nations actually gets stalemated and gets engulfed in a quagmire. I shall certainly not recommend, although my personal opinion is my opinion, to involve Arctic related issues through the United Nations mechanism, which is totally dysfunctional. The Security Council is non-representative of current geopolitical realities. It will just give more clout to China if you take it to United Nations. So if I were, dealing with this suggestion, I'll just shoot it down immediately without anything. That's my moderator's prerogative. I'll go to the next question. It is from Kyle Marston. How can the US and India build our diplomatic relationship on trust and veritable based truth in Arctic science? And I think people have talked about cooperation between India and US, but any further comments? How can the US and India build our diplomatic relationship on trust and veritable based truth in Arctic science? That is the question posed by Kyle Marston. Nobody wants to answer that question. Oh.
I think scientific cooperation is something which one of our panelists is most qualified to talk about. I think let her answer that.
Kangavalli, you want to say anything?
As such, the US-India cooperation through the Arctic Council, like any other Arctic observer states, we do cooperate on projects that US undertakes under the working groups. There are 6 working groups, and there are several projects. As an observer state, India has been contributing tremendously to the scientific cooperation. We engage with CAF, that's one of the working groups. We engage on Arctic Migratory Birds Initiative. We engage on Arctic aerosol problem, the black carbon issues. India does a tremendous work in that. The Grubenberg Mood Observatory is something that India has been providing data. The glacial mint, India has been providing data. So on a multilateral level, India has been engaging with not just US, or with all other states as well. So India's contribution has on the scientific aspect has been pretty good. Where we are lagging is the strategic aspect. Where we are lagging is not taking a holistic approach to the Arctic problem, not being short-sighted about the Chinese development in the region. We need to be careful about the Malacca. I mean, we have the leverage over Malacca. The slower the increase in traffic towards the Arctic. I'm not saying it's going to change the Suez Canal route and we are going to move into the Arctic. There's going to be more traffic in the Arctic, but slowly the Northern Sea route, the transpolar shipping route that the Chinese are getting into is something they are looking at 2040, where they don't pass through any of the territorial waters. They go directly through the Central Arctic Ocean. These are all areas that India needs to be keen on. The Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, India is not a party. I've been talking about it, that India should engage in the ecosystem management. So these are areas that India needs to, invest in. And India has been contributing otherwise on the scientific aspect pretty much well. The NCPR is doing a commendable job on all these activities. Thank you.
Anyone else? Or we'll move to the next question. But before I move to the next question, two comments. The Fisheries International Treaty in Central Arctic Ocean was signed in 2018, and this is 2023. Indian government has been short-sighted because anybody interested party can sign that treaty. It's better to be within a management system than without. Otherwise, you cannot influence that. And at some point in time, these fishery resources will become important. You know, there is predatory, extraterritorial exploitation of fishery resources in almost all regions without naming names. So India must get its act together and become a signatory to that fisheries treaty in Central Arctic Ocean. Kangavalli, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I had recently written a paper on that, on the Central Arctic Ocean region. It is not just about the fisheries, it's a precautionary agreement. And it's about the ecosystem management of the Central Arctic Ocean region. And China, Japan, Korea are all parties to the Central Arctic Ocean region agreement. India and Singapore are the only Asian states which are not party. So by being it's not an open agreement. Somebody has to invite us now. So once we are on board, it would be an effect. We can play an effective role. And later in the regional fisheries management organization, once it is developed, India need not send our long distance fishing vessels to fish, but we can be part of the ecosystem management. We will have a strategic leverage over that place. So that's what I want.
So clarifying, yes, at this point in time, it is not about exploitation, but when we plan from a national perspective, you take 100 years viewpoint, not 5 years viewpoint. If you are out of a management system, it will be repetition of new non-proliferation treaty or, those kind of negotiations. You have to be within international treaties and regimes to safeguard your interests. If you are outside that treaty system, you would not be able to chart the course you need from a national perspective. That's the comment I would make. I go to the next question, which is from Captain Ganesh. Arctic expeditions by India are not at the same level as the Antarctic expeditions, which is a true statement. But he's asking, how can India play a stronger or more significant role in Arctic expeditions? Any of the panelists can take the question.
So I think Captain Ganesh is right in pointing out that what we've done, in the South Pole is much more than what we've done in the Arctic. Something similar should be done. In fact, not only expeditions, I think there should be more research stations which should be looked at, because the kind of expeditions that we've taken so far, we've actually didn't piggyback on others and not taken our own initiative. What we should be doing is looking at what interests us, and then trying to solicit some help. In fact, we have very good relationship with the Arctic states, all of them, and it's not difficult to do that. But the point is that one should identify what one really wants and strengthen that part, which is really needed.
Rangavalli?
Yeah, I would like to add into it. Like the major concern is that we don't have our own ice-breaking vessel, so we will have to charter it from Norway. And the second point is that with respect to the Antarctic expedition, we have been having it for a very long time. And the Arctic expedition, if I remember correctly, it started around 2007. So there's been around 13 expeditions, and the Chinese have done no far better. They are also around 12 or 13 expeditions. But the leg up, what they have is that they have their own icecraft vessels to get into the center. Even now, there is a vessel moving across the Central Arctic Ocean region. So these just the Chinese are taking in the region. So India, by investing a icecraft vessel, will be really, really beneficial for its exploration.
Dr. Pathak, you want to say anything on this issue?
So I think that, most of what I wanted to say has already been said. The Chinese, Indians as compared to the Chinese don't have that sort of a strategic vision, which could possibly have been the reason as to why there has been a more not as huge a focus on the Arctic as has been on the Antarctic. But that being said, the fact that we are having this discussion is a positive step forward.
So going back to Captain Ganesh's question, India has 3 research stations in Antarctica. India has a kind of vessel, Sagar Nidhi, which can break 40 centimeter of ice, but that will not be beneficial actually in the Arctic conditions where you need actually icebreakers that can like 1.5 or 2 meters size, shelf breaking. Our decision-making process has been very slow. We started in Antarctic expeditions in 1981, and in 2007 we started with the Arctic research. So we are late entrants to that, despite the fact that India was under British rule, the original signee of the Svalbard Treaty in 1920. So there has been a lag phase for whatever reason, but one of the ideas of arranging this discussion was to utilize the think tanks and academics to spur thinking in areas where the government is not thinking. So I hope this discussion serves its purpose. We shall stay in touch with our audience as well as our specialists, and we will actually upload the opening statements and the video recording of this program on the YouTube channel as well as on our website. I am very highly thankful to our 3 distinguished panelists, Kanagavalli Suryanarayanan, Dr. Shriparna Pathak, and Ambassador Anil Vadva for devoting their valuable time and expertise to this program. I'm also thankful to our audience who on a weekend, took 1.5 hour time on an esoteric subject that does not concern day-to-day activities. Lastly, I'm thankful to Team CSA, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Rajiv Verma, Chitkala, and Ankush Bhandari, who helped me in arranging such programs. So I'm highly thankful to you. I may make an announcement that our next program would be a distinguished lecture that would be on August 19th by Ambassador J.N. Mishra on India-Vietnam Strategic Partnership. So please stay tuned. We shall be bringing out our Eventbrite announcement on that. On this particular topic, this is our first roundtable discussion, but I can promise you this will not be the last. For sake of declaration of conflict of interest, 2013 and 2021, I've written on this particular topic. Those are available in public domain. So if people are interested, they can review my papers on this particular topic. But this is a topic we shall continue to pursue in future as well. With those remarks, my final thanks to everyone. Namaskar and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.